Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me for this segment, we have Professor Andrea Pfeifer, co-founder and CEO of Nasdaq-listed ACIU. Professor, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you, Jill. Happy to be there.
And give us a brief overview of ACIU.
Yeah, so ACIU is a Swiss biotech company which is focused on neurodegenerative diseases, which includes Alzheimer, one of the biggest healthcare problems in modern times. And I have very good memories. 2016, we went public at Nasdaq.
In July, you announced a deal for an asset acquisition from Afris. Can you tell us a bit more about the transaction and the rationale behind it?
Yeah, maybe before I go to this, I'd like to say that ACIU has a very broad pipeline, actually. In fact, the broadest pipeline in the field of neurodegenerative diseases with mature phase 2 clinical trials. And I think the differentiation of ACIU and other companies in the field is that we are using precision medicine. I mean, I'm actually coming from the oncology field, and here we learned 30 years ago that if you really want to conquer cancer, then you have to do precision medicine, meaning selecting the patients very carefully for the underlying disease. And this is why we believe actually to look at the patient and have the diagnostic means available in order to diagnose early and diagnose specifically for pathology is key to the success in this area. And this success is actually mediated by our platforms. We have 2 of them, which actually generate molecules for both therapeutics and diagnostics, which can specifically bind conformationally changed proteins, which were a cause of Parkinsons, of Alzheimer. And in fact, in order to do that, you really need to have a specificity. So in other words, these platforms which we have available really allow us to do precision medicine in an area where treatment is so far has been very difficult, and we're just starting to see specific treatments. So with that, let me come then to the next topic, which is in fact our acquisition, why this was so important for us. I think what you see in the field right now, we are understanding, and there was a lot of learnings during the last years, that you have to treat early. In other words, whatever happens in the brain, whenever the neurons are dying, and if you have symptoms in Alzheimer or in Parkinsons or in these other diseases, which we all know as being untreatable, then this is a situation where a lot of your cells have been already killed by this pathological proteins. In other words, what you really want to see going forward is that you want to prevent the disease, manage the disease, rather than treat it when the brain is already damaged. When you see this acquisition in the context, it means that not only in Alzheimer's, where we are certainly one of the leaders, maybe the leader in active vaccination and for that matter prevention, we added to our vaccine portfolio a Parkinson vaccine, which is actually clinically validated and brought us right in front the Parkinson therapeutics, where in fact the treatments right now are in phase 2. There's our own pipeline is complementary in alpha-synuclein, which is the core protein in Parkinson, but it's at early stage. So with this deal, we achieved actually 3 things. We are further established our role in active vaccination and potential prevention of this disease. Secondly, we added a late-stage asset to our portfolio. And thirdly, we complemented our own existing pipeline. So in terms of a pipeline, it was the ideal deal. The other thing which is important to mention is that, of course, we, with the acquisition, we didn't reduce our cash availability. In fact, we got additional 30 millions into the portfolio. In the end, and it's very important, we have additional new investors, in fact, 3 new investors who are the key investors in the BioNTech COVID-19 innovator. So really adding credibility to the overall space we are in neurodegeneration, which is active vaccination. So really, it was almost like a deal made in heaven, I would say, because it addressed many of the aspects we really wanted to do, including bringing some of the top investors and some of the top endorsement for our company with this deal.
Professor, on a high level, tell us more about the Parkinson's disease vaccine, PD-01, you are acquiring in the transaction. How does it fit into your clinical portfolio?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, it's a late-stage asset, which really brought us into the forefront of Parkinson therapeutics. And as I mentioned, it's also a vaccine which allows us to go early. So the moment when we have a diagnosis of potentially alpha-synucleinopathies, we can actually treat the patients early in the development of disease, which is, of course, the best and really desired treatment looking into the future. So what, in fact, was really convincing to us in terms of PD-01 is the clinical data available. It's a clinically validated program with a very nice publication in Nature Lancet Neurology from 2021. And in fact, what we are showing that the vaccine is safe and very well tolerated, that induces a strong immune response, a boostable immune response, and that actually we could show target engagement. And target engagement means in this respect that we could reduce the presence in the brain of these proteins which cause or causatively linked to Parkinson by about 50%. And last but not least, we had signals of clinical evidence by stabilization of some of the motor functions linked to Parkinson's disease. And again, very importantly, these clinical effects were linked to the target engagement, which is also the alpha-synuclein reduction, as well as the immune response, which you could induce. This is PD-01. So collectively, in fact, this means that we got a clinically validated target, which is called PD-01. It's an industry-leading target in Parkinson and really brings us into a forefront of Parkinson treatment, and of course is building on all the diagnostic possibilities which your company has in development. So one more time, it's a deal which really complements extremely well our existing pipeline.
When do you think the clinical trials will start?
So the clinical trial is in full planning. So we don't want to lose any time. In fact, we hope to start a adaptive biomarker-based clinical trial with the optimized formulation very much in the next months to come. And it's a clinical trial which is really looking at 2 parts. The first part is a dose response, where we want to establish the immunogenicity of this optimized formulation, followed by the clinical validation. And both parts are very much linked to each other, which means there is a natural transition from part 1 to part 2, which hopefully will allow us to go into a pivotal development as quickly as possible. So, and of course, here we are building it onto the new potentially FDA regulations, which allow us to use biomarkers as criteria to do clinical trials and late-stage clinical trials. So we are really preparing a biomarker-based clinical trial development.
Okay, and Professor, in the last minute here, you mentioned that your Parkinson's disease vaccine, which targets a disease-causing protein ACIN, is clinically validated. And I know you were also showing some encouraging data from your Alzheimer's disease vaccine programs targeting pathological issues. Can you comment broadly on your vaccine strategy for NDD?
Yes, it's a very good question, and thank you for letting me end the discussion with that. So number one, as I mentioned to you, active vaccination is extremely important for managing of these neurodegenerative diseases because we want to prevent rather than to treat. With the vaccine technology which we have, we could actually show that we can generate antibody titers which are clinically meaningful and allow us to treat the patients early in the development. We are aiming at one injection per year, which again is a big benefit when you look into the overall long-term preventive applications of these products. And last but not least, I think we learned a lot from COVID-19 in terms of acceptance, in terms of awareness. So I think it's the time to really use the idea about active vaccination in neurological diseases simply because it's preventive, it allows us to manage the disease, it's accessible to the whole world potentially, so there are different pricing, and in fact it works extremely well, and the safety profile so far seen is certainly very beneficial with a big impact potentially on society. So we are very excited about this option. And maybe the last sentence, I think ACIU is not just with this precision, but overall really at the forefront of active vaccination in the neurological field. And I think this is certainly something which we believe is very important for the future because we want to prevent rather than treat neuropathological diseases.
Professor, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye then.